I use a sophisticated system of personal productivity as an advanced hacker and solo business owner. And the sophistication in it comes not from complexity, which I do my best to eliminate, but rather from it being hyper optimized and fine tuned to three specific targets. One is my personal neurotype and my configuration at large. Two is my tasks and goals in business, in R&D, the challenges that are specific to my configuration of projects. And third target is the way how I know the world works at this particular moment. All three of them are very far from being normal or ordinary in terms of current state of art in the productivity science and in culture in general. However, I feel like there is this trend of people who are leaning more into more individualistic and self-empowered kind of operation in the world. They also embrace personal differences. They embrace, they learn about their own neurotype, lean into doing multiple projects, combining different types of projects, doing many things that interest them. And this crowd is currently moving towards exactly the same challenges that I solved 10 or 20 years ago and kept building beyond them, which is the reason why I decided to look back at what I actually did, how I actually made the world work for me, as unlikely as it was. I was able to distill specifically a small set of foundation principles from which most of the system can be derived. And this video is about those principles. The first principle is a systemic perspective on productivity as a function of body, identity, and executive operational soft systems. Current productivity science and the way how people understand productivity is entirely concerned with this top layer of executive operational management. Things like calendars, note-taking systems, systems of managing time, energy, setting priorities, various apps, various other devices that help to manage this. This is what I call the executive management layer, the soft layer. However, in my system, this executive management layer contributes to less than 1% of the productivity impact, while the bottom two layers take almost 100% of it. Consider, for example, the body. A very simple example. First off, the productivity is not a goal in itself. Obviously, it's an optimization layer on top of the goals that a person has. So let's suppose the person has a goal of building a business. What most people do is they jump straight to this top layer of operational management. They start gaining information about how to build a business and then combining it with productivity systems to achieve more, to do it correctly, to prioritize, and so on. Meanwhile, if the person doesn't have health in the body level, they cannot build a business. Or if they have health at the baseline, but they do not have a lot of energy, they cannot build a sustainable business, because business is an adversarial environment and you need a lot of energy to sustain it and to work through it. Body provides the baseline of health, but also the idea is that it can be optimized further. And the insight that enables this is that brain is part of the body. The cognitive processes and intellectual processes, they are not some abstract ethereal fluids in the void space. They sit on top of neurochemical processes in the brain. And so there is a direct link from the body to intellectual and cognitive processes. Most people, I think, in our culture at large still treats the intellectual and cognitive processes as quite different from the body. And when people talk about health and body, it's like this separate thing. So we're making health here, and then we go there, and there is some intellectual challenges. But there is no separation. It's one thing. The intellectual and the body is the one thing. There is no distinction. And so what follows from this is that when you start optimizing the body beyond this baseline level of health, the intellectual and cognitive level, benefits automatically. The next layer is identity, and in my system, identity is not level on ego, but rather it is a compound of everything that a person is and does and can possibly do, which functionally identity consists of the world model, the mindset, the cognitive traits, the personality traits, things like that. On the structural level, the identity is better understood as a system of beliefs, most of them being unconscious. The things that I identify myself with consciously is just the tip of the iceberg. Most of that is unconscious. And this is important because even at this conscious level, let's say that a person has a goal of building a business again. They think, after taking some courses and doing some coaching, they think they can do it, it's doable, they see how, they see the path. However, if deep down the person does not identify as somebody who is able to own their money, own their time, own their systems, and importantly, be responsible and take full responsibility for all of that, if they do not identify with that, they cannot build a business. And so the identity layer is the most currently underestimated and misunderstood level of this productivity pyramid. The key insight here is that if you prioritize these bottom two layers, stop over focusing on this top operational management layer and focus instead on the body and the identity, this alone will start achieving the goals underneath your productivity optimization automatically. And there are multiple factors that contribute to this process and why it even works. I'll just give you a few examples. So when you start optimizing your body and your identity beyond a certain baseline, you develop a sensitivity and start noticing that some things in the surrounding environment and the society that seem normal no longer seem normal, and then they start being unbearable. And something that you notice in maybe a little bit mildly disliked as being an employee, after developing sensitivity, you start hating it so much that you can no longer even accept this system. And so you don't have an option. You have to go on your own and start making your own thing, or going solo and going into hermit mode. So sensitivity is one example. Another example is that on top of that sensitivity, you develop the actual capability to do what it takes. This capability is largely physical. It's in the body, and it's also must be supported in the identity. So once these two levels are solved, you have the capability to go out of that environment and put yourself into that place where you want to be. Third example is, this is mostly on the identity optimization part. You start developing confidence and self-trust that is required to build what you want. This is also very important because even when you have the energy and the knowledge, if you don't have self-trust in yourself and confidence that you can make it, you cannot make it. Optimizing this bottom of the pyramid forces you to be productive. And then also this idea that once you start optimizing these bottom layers, pretty much everything else that is important follows from it. For example, you start prioritizing your body and health beyond the baseline. This goes into these multiple directions of research and action. You start looking into diet, sleep, exercise, nervous system regulation. You start learning about yourself, learning about what the science knows about it, learning about what the mainstream social culture knows about it. Taking in all that knowledge, putting it together with what you know about yourself, and start engineering a system that works for you. The point here is that one correct priority placed on the bottom of the pyramid, body and identity, just from this one decision already starts moving your entire operational environment into the correct direction. Principle number 2, I operate my brain as heavy machinery, something like a spacecraft and not a civilian one. If you think about a spacecraft, it's this huge, heavy thing that has a momentum of its own. It moves largely on its own. It also has various internal chambers that convert some basic elements into something that it needs internally. It has various mechanisms that are not visible on the surface but work underneath. And key aspect of a spacecraft is that it leverages the laws of physics rather than applying force to produce movement. So to start at the movement of spacecraft, you provide a certain initial push, which starts the momentum. And then while it's already moving, you don't actually control it per se, rather you provide this small high leverage force impacts to it that steer the course, make it go faster, slower, turn around, and so on. And this is the opposite of how our social culture portrays the thinking process. Most people perceive and think about the thinking process as kind of moving the pieces on the chessboard, where you have all of these different types of pieces in your head, the thoughts, the sensory inputs, concepts, categories, linking devices, and then you start combining them and putting them together using logic, forming the chains of logic from them. And we call this thinking. Like, I think. The ego takes this, takes credit for this entire thing, and it says, I think. But the truth is, there is this underlying unconscious mind that actually does the thinking. And these pieces in the consciousness are just glimpses that it sends out, and then you put them together into something that resembles a congruent logical process. The key insight, so if you think again about the spacecraft, it doesn't even make sense to think about it in this kind of control paradigm where you move things by applying force to them on the chessboard and then put them together. It doesn't even need to be put together. It's already one holistic thing and it's already moving on its own. And the key insight behind this principle is that the brain is really the most powerful when it's left alone. When you stop thinking of it as this mess of distinct pieces that you need to put together using logic, but rather you start seeing it as this high mass and high momentum powerful thing, which with plenty of internal operation that you don't necessarily need to know about. And leave it alone. Develop trust with it. Let it move. And then once this is set up, you can simply give it tasks and it will come up with a solution. And those solutions will be state-of-the-art, cutting edge, whatever, the best of the best. And also they will be very personal in the specific configuration that you exist. One example of, so obviously this paradigm is very powerful and it works in a variety of very practical ways in my productivity system. One example that I can give to you is how I build things. It's a very uncommon process. I use downloads. I receive those downloads of a complete blueprint of whatever I want to build, whether it be an article, a video, and writing an exploit, building a course. It starts with a download. And there is peculiar feeling. So download is a blueprint of the thing that I want to build that is complete in the structural perspective. It may be lacking details, it may be lacking some internal connections, but the structure is complete and I get it all at once, in moments. The concept of a download and this feeling is very familiar to the spiritual and esoteric kind of community, which I don't think I have much of that community in my audience. But in the spiritual community, the way how it works for them is more emotional. They get emotional downloads. And for most people, the closest thing to this feeling is the feeling of an insight, when you get this light bulb moment and feeling that something enters your mind from the external, from the above or from external world, and it's just sudden. And most people get this in glimpses. It's like one idea maybe once a week. This ability of getting downloads, I wasn't born with that. I engineered it very intentionally throughout my life. I took this insight as the guide and I started building on that, optimizing the rest of the bottom layers of this productivity system. And over time, it developed into the system that I just get a complete blueprint of the project that I'm building. I can jot it down on paper and it goes straight into building pipeline. This entire paradigm of treating your brain as something that can and should be left alone is probably the single most powerful thing in this entire system. And the next two pillars, principles that I'm discussing, directly support the functioning in this mode. Principle 3, keep the soft management system simple. I'm talking about this upper layer of operational management and coordination, which includes various calendars, apps, time management systems, prioritization principles, and so on, as simple as possible to eliminate friction, to eliminate tax. What I found out is that I tried and experimented with every single productivity soft system that exists. None of them eventually stayed with me. Most of them, when I started looking at them, were a worse version of something that I already developed for myself. And most of the mainstream productivity advice is toxic to my productivity. This is something that I had to make peace with. And so I had to engineer things that work for me from scratch. Take, for example, this idea of a calendar that has blocks in it. I'm not talking about the performance of productivity that is a thing in itself. I'm talking about using it as an actual scaffolding for productivity. And it works for many people. I completely see it working for certain neurotypes. For me, it's toxic. I tried it so many times, and the moment I wake up and I see this calendar with these blocks, and I'm already exhausted. I don't even want to start my week. And so I had to build these different systems that are much more flexible and accommodate to how my flow mode works. So productivity, soft systems is one of my earliest hobbies. When I taught myself C++ in school, the first software that I built was a productivity system. And back then, time management and getting things done were all the rage. And I tried it. I did not quite like it. And I also had this one insight that if you just simply start recording what you're doing every hour, instead of planning ahead, you kind of look backwards and record it, keep track of it. And then you count the amount of time and what you are doing in various categories. This provides an automatic feedback to the brain, which it uses to optimize itself. This is the insight that I had. And so the system didn't exist. I built it as a software. I used it to optimize myself. And the thing is, nowadays, the system is extremely popular. Like, I was early by a lot of years. And nowadays, it's all the rage. And people use it all the time, even more than they should, because this system, it's not for daily operation. You don't need to record what you have been doing all your life. You need to do it on a certain period, maybe 1 month, to provide this feedback to the brain, let it optimize, and then move forward. And so I keep those systems that I engineer for myself nowadays as simple as possible. One key principle that I use is this: the entirety of the system must fit into my operating memory. I do not want to offload anything. If I need to use a board to keep the bulk of the system, it will produce so much operational tax that eventually I just get rid of it. The main thing, it has to be so simple, reduced to the absolute minimum principles, that I can keep the entirety of it in my conscious mind. And the second principle is that the system must come with zero operational tax. If I feel friction when I use it, if I feel resistance to opening that notebook or using it, it's not my system. Last but not the least, principle number 4, I remove access to my attention. 15 years ago, I put my phone on Do Not Disturb and never looked back. And nowadays, I take it to extreme. You cannot call me, you cannot text me, you cannot walk by my house and knock on my door. I do not exist in your reality outside of the specific interfaces that I designed and put out there purposes of public relations, like this YouTube channel, like my business email. And when I say interfaces, it's not a metaphor, it's literally the same structure as some API in programming, where this thing, it has a very strictly defined scope, it has a strictly defined filter on what will come through it. It has strictly defined purposes and targets and so on and so forth. It's very structured and it's very rigid as an interface. This principle is actually the extreme of eliminating distractions principle. The fact that distractions are toxic to productivity is not new, and it has been quite extensively discussed in the entire productivity field for years now. There were books written about it. However, after all these years, most people still misunderstand what it's all about. It's not about losing the 25 minutes of time to go back into the flow state. It's much deeper and much more toxic. So the idea is that this is the normal state of operation that is required to survive, maybe even thrive in the society. And this is the state which is required for deep work and flow state, especially doing hard technical things. The levels here represent neurochemical balances. In order to be in this state, you have a specific balance. You need to have a specific balance of neurochemistry that enables this. It's not miracle, it's neurochemistry. However, in order to get from this mode to this mode, the brain has to invest energy and do work building up this level of neurochemicals. So what really happens when you are in this deep mode and somebody comes up and says hello, you think, okay, I can say hello back. It's just one moment. Even if you know that it will take 25 minutes to go back, you're a polite person, you're a nice person, and you're willing to sacrifice those 25 minutes. Not really. I'm not willing, but just an example. So you think that's just 25 minutes. What really happens is it's not about time, it's about what you teach your brain, what your brain learns. Imagine the perspective of the brain that invests this. So getting to this level involves metabolic cost, which is large. And so imagine the perspective of the brain. It just invested this energy, this work into getting to this state. And some stranger comes up and calls you and whatever and pushes you back. Your brain is resilient. It says, okay, I can do it again. It tries again. It invests this huge amount of energy to get into this neurochemical state. And some random strangers comes up and knocks it out again. And so what your brain learns is that the economy of deep work mode and high flow state is so bad that it won't even start it again because it becomes destructive. The amount of energy that gets pulled out of the system by you pushing yourself into going back to this mode after distractions, every time it takes this amount of energy and work from the entire body to get into this state. For most people, it feels like resistance. Of course, it was annoying until I understood that it's actually serving a big purpose in my life and teaching me to operate my brain in a correct way, which I currently do. And so this entire principle, what I was talking right now is just about the distractions. And so the entire principle of removing excess is taking this principle of setting boundaries to the extreme, because excess is the ability to impose distractions, right? And not just distractions, but also structural perturbations. So by removing access to me, my point here is that I train my brain to trust me, that it can build a good economy for this mode of work that I need for my challenges and my purposes. And so my brain trusts me that if it needs 4 hours of deep work, it gets the 4 hours. I sit down to work and my deeper parts of the brain know that nothing will interrupt me in 4 hours. Nothing will interrupt me in 16 hours. Nothing will interrupt me in a week, 4 weeks, as long as I need. And once my deeper mind sees this runway, it is extremely happy to go on this level and start building. And most counterintuitive and absolutely amazing thing about this is that once you develop this trust, you don't need 14 or 16 hours. And I personally am still a bit adjusting myself to it, because when I'm planning something and habitually I allocate a certain amount of time to it, like, okay, this task is probably going to take 4 hours and this is probably 1 week. And then I sit down and I do the whole thing that I supposed to take a week in 2 hours. And it still surprises me, and I have to update my models. And it just keeps compressing. I mean, obviously there is the AI that compresses this, but AI is just an external scaffolding. It started working for me much earlier than I started using AI. This compression of my productivity pipeline because of the trust that I developed with my own productive brain. This wraps the 4 foundational pillars of my productivity system. They are fundamental principles from which much of the system can be derived logically. And in the next videos, I want to talk more about the more practical, concrete techniques that can be universally applied in most situations to introduce instant leverage.